Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Voices for Change Film Club interview series. Today, I will be interviewing Lesley Elizondo and Cecilia Albertini. They are the filmmakers of Basta, which is an incredible film that sheds light on the underground shadow world that janitors have to deal with sexual harassment and their basic workers' rights. So this month, the month of May, we are bringing awareness to the subject through their film, and we're interviewing them about the behind the scenes of going into the subject and how it was filming it and getting some insights about the subject as a whole and as them as filmmakers. So welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. The first question I want to ask you is how you found this story.
So we found the story actually reading the LA Times. It was on the first page of the LA Times about 3.5 years ago that we read about the self-defense class that was created by the Basta organization to make sure that female janitors have self-defense skills that they can use on the workplace. We thought, oh, that's so interesting. At first, we thought that we were going to make a doc about the self-defense class. But then as we went in and we contacted the organization, we realized, oh, there's a much larger story here. It's not only about the self-defense, because it's also about changing the laws and passing the bills that they were trying to pass. And it's just more about changing the entire system. That's the work that Basta is doing, that Basta is doing for night janitors.
When we read it, we were definitely kind of more inspired, because it wasn't just a story of the horrible things that happen in the workplace. It was also a reaction to the abuse, was to, okay, let's empower our workers so that they have tools in their disposal to do something about it.
I think we were both like, this is a hopeful, positive story in the sense that these women are trying to make a difference, are trying to change things. And so we didn't want to just tell a depressing story of abuse, but we also just wanted to show, okay, there's been some horrible things have happened and are happening, but there is hope because there are people fighting to change things.
We had several conversations in either our experiences or our family's experiences with this type of abuse and assault, that it's global and it's common, and how awful that, you know, we read these things and it's not surprising. It's sort of like, yeah, like
that makes
other
sense.
confirmation of kind of the world. In the same way where I think we both kind of focused on, cool, they're empowering other women, other workers, so that they can go out into the world and hopefully avoid a horrible situation.
So you read about this story, and just to be clear, so the film is called Basta, and the story that they read was about an organization called Basta, based in Los Angeles, that is helping janitorial night workers fight against, or learn how to fight and protect themselves against abuse in the workplace. Mostly women, mostly sexual harassment and abuse. What was the turning point where you decided that this was something you wanted to turn into a film?
That was like our first instinct, you know, when we read the story. Being filmmakers, we were like, we want to go in and talk to these people and see. I think, you know, the main thing is access, especially when making a doc. You want to make sure that you have access to the story and to the people. So we contacted the organization, and they were super responsive and very, very open to telling their story and to explaining who they were. They actually wanted to get their story out there. So they were incredibly collaborative, super open, super just available to talk to us. And so that's when we realized, okay, we probably have a film here because we have access. The story is very timely, very urgent, and needs to be told.
A key part of that, right, is you said it also access. And, you know, access is such an important thing when it comes to film, and when it comes to speaking about such an important, touchy, sensitive subject. a lot of people may not be willing to speak out about it. But from your experience as women, as filmmakers, as storytellers, tell me about how you feel about the power of telling your story, right? Was there a shift in power? You said people wanted to get their story out there. Do you feel like it was empowering to them to tell their story? And in general, like when it comes to injustice or speaking out about abuse, how do you feel about the power dynamic that shifts there, if you do feel like it shifts?
When we started with the access step of meeting with these women, from the very beginning, they were very clear in the need to tell everybody their story. And I think that's how they've been functioning as an organization, both Basta and also through the union SEIU. They created sort of a sub-organization that just pushes the narrative forward so that it stops and so that there's protection so that that doesn't happen to anyone else again. They were in the moment where they really wanted everybody to know so that no one can turn a blind eye, I guess. And so when we did have our cameras on them, it was very open and freeing, and I think empowering for us too, especially when we kind of had the sit down interviews where we got to ask the really tough questions, and every single one of them answered them truthfully to their own experience. And for me, it was just kind of beautiful to have that strength, overcoming such, horrible events and wanting to push that story forward so that no one else has to go through it again.
They were all very open when we sat down with them, and it's about empowering them to have a voice and to speak up. And they've been doing it. It's not just thanks to our documentary. They've obviously been speaking up and talking to the media already. A lot of them had already talked to the media many different times, and they used their voice to also help with their agenda of what they're doing on the legislative side. And they did eventually succeed in passing a bill to ensure protection for janitors with a series of rules that would require employers to make sure that janitors go through a certain kind of training, sexual harassment training. And they use their stories to push their agenda, as they should. And I think that there is something powerful about being able to speak up about an abuse that you've survived, because it's a way to reclaim your power and your voice. So hopefully we were some of the people that gave them that opportunity.
What would you say is the most surprising part of creating this film? Like, was there a part or a story or a fact that you were shocked throughout the process of the interviews or the research?
Once you really get to hear the stories of abuse, that sometimes it really gets, it's so horrible in a way that you don't expect it, because you don't want to expect it. Honestly, you don't want to think that things like that happen in the world. So we try to look away sometimes, but when you really start hearing the details and the relentlessness of some abusers, it's really surprising to me, because you can't explain it to yourself. Why would someone do that? And so, yeah, with some of their stories, unfortunately, that was the surprising part, like when they really got to explain to us in the detail what was going on and how much they were not being listened to. I think that was another big thing. It wasn't that surprising, but still, when you hear it, they went up to their bosses and tried to explain, this is what's going on. And they were met with indifference. Nobody cared, basically, until the union stepped in and the Basta stepped in and all of that. I was very inspired by these women, honestly, because they went through so much, not just in terms of the sexual abuse in the workplace, but also a lot of these women are immigrants, and they came here, and that whole journey was its own traumatic experience. And they're almost all of them are mothers. They're single mothers, their lives are so complex, and yet they are so positive and so hardworking, and just their tenacity left me incredibly inspired and yeah, and surprised. I mean, they're superheroes for us.
Absolutely. For me, the surprising part was because a lot of these women were immigrant, single parents. I saw a lot of similarities with my mom, with my family. And, you know, hearing these stories, the same as you, where you don't want to believe that that type of malice exists within people, but in the same way where you're not really surprised because you've heard it, or you know, you've seen it. These women, even before they got to become janitors in Los Angeles in the night shift, they had already traveled several countries to get here. Really, all they want is just a better life for their children. And so seeing them as superheroes, I also see them as, you know, these amazing, powerful people that just keep going and keep fighting for just to better, you know, everybody else's lives. So yeah, they're amazing.
And speaking of everyone else's lives, I mean, the stories that you told in your film mostly focus on women, and indeed, women, immigrants, single mothers, women of color are usually the most targeted when it comes to abuse and harassment around the world. You know, we've seen statistics on this. When things go bad economically, when there's a war, the first people and the most affected people are women and children.
Yeah.
So we do see this in your film. But what's also interesting to bring attention to is that you also interviewed male, in particular, male and queer people who also experience harassment in their night shifts. And, you know, very often we speak about how women's rights is human rights. Tell us a little bit about how you feel like speaking up for women's rights does help the collective, and who else, even though we concentrate sometimes on women's stories, it really is telling a story for all kinds of vulnerable people.
When we approached the organizations to give us names of people that would be available and, you know, willing to come in for our interviews, we were given both male and female names, and I think we did have a discussion in terms of which ones were the ones that we thought would be most impactful. And I think when we got Henry's stories, it was one that we were both maybe surprised about. I definitely was. You don't think as men being vulnerable, and Henry's story was him sharing his vulnerability in his workplace in a new environment. He's also an immigrant who, you know, started working as a janitor, and he found himself in this situation. And the complexity of his story is that because he is a man, not only was he, you know, experiencing basically stalking and harassment, he had this sort of societal pressure to, you know, just be like, well, you're a man, deal with it. Like this is just, you know, talk that men have. Like, where I think the stories with the women, it was very much kind of internalized on them. Like they felt like shame in terms of oh, it's my fault, I might have done something, I might have said something. And hearing it from Henry with these same feelings, it sort of equated that idea that, well, this isn't, you know, this isn't just a problem of men against women, it's a power of misogyny.
We go more into gender roles rather than
Yeah,
male, female. It's more about the roles that humans play.
definitely. Like
Uh,
it's a power thing. It's not men against women. With Henry, like it's a power thing. It's they saw someone who was vulnerable and, you know, took advantage, and that's basically what happens.
The fact that also Henry was queer, and that obviously made him more vulnerable to, and that's what he says too in the interview, you know. So it's not just about women, it's about, we have many different vulnerable people in our society, and they're not all women, and they're all targets. And so I think that what you were, you know, we were saying is about, yeah, this is not just about women's rights. Women's rights are human rights, in the sense that women are speaking up, not just for themselves, but for everybody who is vulnerable. And yeah, and it's more than women, unfortunately.
After watching your film, obviously people are going to hopefully be more aware of these issues. And is there anything that in particular that you'd want people to take action on, or how do you want, what kind of action or emotions would you want to invoke out of your audience after they watch your film?
If they can in any way support, not just, you know, the Basta organization, but any organization that fights for workers' rights and women's rights, if they can support these organizations in any kind of way, it might be with their time or with their money, like in any way they can, or even just like spreading awareness. But I think that what is happening in the world over the last few years, which is great, is that people have started speaking up about abuse of all kinds much more openly. And whether, like, you know, before it was very much a thing of to be ashamed of, and that you wouldn't talk about. And now it's changing, and I think that's incredible. And I think that our society is going to be better because of that. People are inspired to speak up when they see other people speaking up. So hopefully after seeing our film, if there are any other survivors out there that see themselves in these stories, and they don't have to be janitors, you know, there's all kinds of survivors in all kinds of workplaces, and not just in the workplace, also at home. So if this inspires other survivors to speak up and tell their story, then I think that would be incredible.
I hope that all kinds of people get to see the film, and if they weren't aware of the issue, now that they are, essentially do something about it, whether in their own personal lives, maybe, you know, because harassment looks different for different people. And so just being aware that your actions can potentially be harassment, or people will carry themselves a little better, will be kinder to their coworkers, to people that are you know, around them.
You know, we run into janitors, night janitors, sometimes when we're leaving our office, or, you know, or in the morning when we're walking into the office and we see them, we say hi, we you know, exchange glances, but we just don't know. You just never know when you're seeing a stranger. You don't know what they're going through. You don't know what's really happening with them. And so, yeah, I think let's all be a little kinder to each other, and knowing that everyone might be going through something really terrible, and, you know, they might not be able to speak about it.
Well, thank you both so much for this
Of
incredible
course.
interview and for shining light on such an important topic, and giving some practical steps or some things for people to take away and think about. Thank you so much, Cecilia. Thank you so much, Lesley. And
Thank you, Yasmin.
Basta is in our film collection, our online film collection. Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you so much.